Good morning and welcome to Senate State Affairs. Appreciate your attendance at this late hour in the session and appreciate your interest in our agenda. Happy Friday. We're going to start out by having our Secretary Peggy take a silent roll and also thank Emma and Ashley, our pages, for helping us out this morning. We'll start out with House Bill 421, and as we get ready to do that, we may not get to all the testimony. We've got quite a bit on the three bills, so we'll kind of try to meter the time so we get through them, but we'll do the best we can. Senator Adams, welcome to committee to introduce yourself, and the time's yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. Good Friday, committee. For the record, my name is Ben Adams, Senator, District 12, Nampa, and I will be presenting House Bill 421. This legislation amends Section 73-114 of Idaho Code to add several definitions. On page 2, line 19, and if you want to follow along, this is probably the easiest way to keep up. On page 2, line 19, we define boy as a minor human male. On line 20, we define father as a male parent. On line 21 through 24, we define female as an individual who has, had, will have, or but for a developmental or genetic anomaly or historical accident, would have the reproductive system that at some point produces, transports, and utilizes eggs for fertilization. On lines 25 through 31, we define gender when used to refer to males, females, or the natural differences between males and females as a synonym for sex, which is also defined, if you go to page 3, line 5, as the individual's biological sex, either male or female. Continuing on page 2, line 32, we define girl as a minor human female. On lines 42 through 45, we define male as an individual who has, had, will have, or but for a developmental or genetic anomaly or historical accident, would have the reproductive system that at some point produces, transports, and utilizes sperm for fertilization. And on line 47, we define mother as a female parent. This legislation also amends 3 sections of Idaho Code. Section 1506C, also known as the Vulnerable Child Protection Act, to account for the changes that I previously mentioned, those definitions. It also amends Section 33-6602, which is now 33-6702, to account for those same changes, and Section 39-245A for the same reason. This legislation allows us to have clear and uniform definitions throughout Idaho Code for the terms boy, girl, father, mother, male, female, sex, and gender. To make this point even clearer for the committee, the term father is referenced 147 times in Idaho Code, and each time it aligns with the definition found on line 20. The term mother is referenced 133 times, each aligning with the definition on line 47. The term male is referenced 54 times and female 88 times, each aligning with that corresponding definition. Gender is referenced 32 times in Idaho Code and is always referenced to biological sex as defined on page 3, line 5 that I mentioned earlier. So committee, the Idaho legislature, both past and present, has worked very diligently to ensure that our laws are based on objectivity and not subjectivity. And this legislation before you today maintains that practice. I see this as a cleanup bill for our definitions. It aligns with the legislative intent of previously passed legislation. And Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions for Senator Adams? Senator Winthrop?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a few questions for you, and then I don't want to take too much because I know there are people I want to testify. But I think there are many questions I have, Senator. But
If I could have you do a couple.
Yeah. So the first and foremost, I think are we getting rid of the terms man and woman? Like, I don't see those defined anywhere.
Senator Adams.
Mr. Chairman, if they are already, Mr. Chairman, Senator Winthrop, if they're already defined in code, which they're not part of this piece of legislation. This is adding some definitions, but I don't see, what were the terms you used again?
Man and woman.
Man and woman. Yeah, I don't know if that term is already defined or not. What I do know is that these specific terms do align with the statute that we already have.
Senator Wintrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Adams, why do you want to do this? Like, why are you choosing definitions that I think are very subjective to place in Idaho code?
Very open-ended question, but you're welcome to respond, Senator Adams.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Wintrow, words matter. And the reality is that the definitions that you see before you are quite objective.
Senator Wintrow, I'll give you one more if you
Okay,
want.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess what I'm curious about, so I think you know this about me, that I used to teach women's studies and gender studies, and there's a full range of human complexity that we're cramming into two categories here. So what are we doing with, I just feel like these are not scientific definitions. So I'm just wondering how you came up with these definitions.
Senator Adams.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Wintrow, I would disagree with you strongly that these are not backed by what we know, not only in biology, but also in etymology, right? The study of language. And I'll use gender as an example, since that was something you like to teach. Gender, the key root there is gene. Genes born of or produced by, right? Genos means birth. Gene, race or family. Everything has to do with a reproductive process. So I would just disagree with you on that point, Senator Wintrow.
Let's go to some testimony. Misty Delacarpe-Tolman. Welcome to committee.
Morning. Sorry, I left my remarks at home, so this is the first time I've ever read off my phone, so I need my readers. Good morning, Chair Guthrie, members of committee. My name is Misty Delacarpe-Tolman, and I'm the State Director for Planned Parenthood Alliance Advocates. We strongly oppose House Bill 421, a bill that falsely conflates gender with sex and denies the existence of trans, non-binary, and intersex people. This bill would force LGBTQ people to live a lie and put them at risk of harm by disclosing the sex they were assigned at birth on documents like driver's licenses and marriage licenses. I also want to send love to all the transgender folks and their loved ones who are being forced to stand up in front of a room of people and defend their right to exist. No matter how many times lawmakers write this type of legislation, we are here to tell you loud and clear that trans, non-binary, and intersex people cannot be erased and their voices cannot be silenced. By equating sex and gender solely with biological sex, this bill erases the lived experiences of trans and non-binary people and completely denies the existence of intersex people. Moreover, the bill defines male and female based solely on reproductive capabilities, ignoring the many ways in which individuals' bodies exist and the diverse ways that people express their gender. The bill will undoubtedly create confusion, and the implications of this legislation are far-reaching and will have devastating consequences. Trans and non-binary people would be forced to disclose their sex assigned at birth at any time they're using their driver's license, such as traveling, applying for a job, or going out to a restaurant or bar. This not only violates their right to self-identify, but also exposes them to even more potential harm and violence. A study conducted by UCLA shows that trans people are 4 times more likely than cisgender people to be victims of violent crime, and nearly half of trans people have been harassed or assaulted due to their identity. A bill like HB 421 will only exacerbate that violence. Moreover, the bill could harm same-sex couples and their children. By narrowly defining mother and father, it could inadvertently exclude same-sex couples, potentially harming the legal recognition and rights of these families, such as receiving tax credit and social benefits.
You could wrap up.
Yes, the truth is this bill forces individuals to conform to rigid gender norms, jeopardizes their rights and well-being. I urge you to consider the human cost of this bill and oppose House Bill 421, ensuring that Idaho is a state that respects and protects the dignity of all its residents.
Thank you for your testimony. Nixon Matthews. Welcome to committee.
Thank you. So my name is Nixon Matthews. I live in District 16, and I oppose this bill. The last time I testified, I focused on the humanity of Idahoans like me. That embracing our gender identity is often a lifetime journey of self-discovery and resilience and joy. And I talked about how this bill erases the existence of my community and that it sends a message that we're not worthy of recognition. And it wasn't just me, every person who testified at that hearing was opposed to this bill. But it passed, and so here we are. So if you can't be convinced by hearing about the harm to people like me, then maybe you'll understand if I tell how this will harm people like you. The 17-year-old basketball player whose gender was aggressively challenged by an opposing player's father who believed she was trans. He had to be removed from the game. The track athlete who, after winning her race, was subjected to an investigation after complaints by the parents of the losing athlete. The woman in the public bathroom mistaken for being trans because short hair, and was told, "You're disgusting, you don't belong here." And most recently, the teenage girl in Utah who faced threats of violence so severe, she required police protection after a member of the Utah State Board of Education falsely implied that she was trans. This is the result. This is happening in places where bills like 421 are being passed. It creates an unsafe space, a more unsafe space for my community, but it creates an unsafe space for all women. Are we going to start requiring sex verification, people carrying around their birth certificate? Women must have long hair. Who decides and what's the line? So HB 421 will complicate and harm lives. It benefits nobody. It's not a matter of simplicity. The science does not support this. And I urge you to oppose this bill.
Thank you for your testimony. Eric Garanda. And if I didn't get that right, please correct me.
You did well. Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. My name is Eric Gironda, a longtime Boise resident, and I'm here to testify against H 421 and then the next bill, the 538. I signed up 2 times, but I'm only going to speak once. To tell you why I'm against these bills, I need to fill you in a little family history. This is my mom. She is the same age as Anne Frank. She was the same age as Anne Frank. She was born in Philadelphia, and she was one of the lucky ones. My grandparents came over from Austria in 1923, and so my mom was born here in America. And like I said, they were some of the lucky ones. My mother lost 3 uncles and many cousins in World War II, but long before all the bad stuff started happening, all the real bad stuff started happening, years before the war started, the Austrian government and the German government was quite like this: elected representatives who voted and debated on bills. And a radical minority came upon and started having all these small little bills, little stuff like pronouns or against gay people or disabled folks. And they used intimidation and fear to get people who wouldn't stand for this really bad stuff to vote for them. And my prayer for you today is to have the courage to stand up and say no and vote no on these bills and all those other bills, the ones about libraries and women, because this is quite emotional for me. Today is Good Friday, and I urge you to vote against these things just because my mom had no part. She was 16 when World War II ended. She had no part. She lived in America. She carried the guilt and shame of what her family did, the part her family played in Europe in the 40s and 30s for the rest of her life. And I pray that you not pass on the guilt and shame of of just these little bills they start to pass now. And don't pass those on to your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, I do have, this is these are just pictures. I brought one for everybody.
You can hand that out to the page.
They're faded.
Julianne Donnelly Zool. Welcome to committee.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, members of the committee. I'm Julianne Donnelly Zool, and I'm here with the ACLU of Idaho, also in firm opposition to this bill. You'll be hearing from a number of people about personal experience. I'm going to focus on a few legal objections. First, declaring that there is no such thing as gender does not erase Idaho's obligation to comply with the 100+ statutes that are federal forbidding sex discrimination and complying with the Supreme Court decision, Bostock versus Clayton County. Bostock states that discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation is discrimination because of sex. It is impossible, this is a quote from the opinion, to discriminate against a person for being homosexual or transgender without discriminating against that individual based on sex. I included in my written testimony a list of every federal statute that bars sex discrimination that was compiled by Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. It's over 100 federal statutes. We cannot pretend that those don't exist and don't apply by saying gender does not exist, only sex. Second, this bill is a violation of the single subject rule of the Idaho State Constitution, Article 3, Section 16. You heard a few minutes ago all the various sections of code that are now going to be redirected to the definition as rewritten in this bill. It's hundreds of pieces of code that also applies to rules and policies. Last, I want to speak briefly about a First Amendment concern. And we speak a lot in this space about government overreach and wanting to avoid it. This is a value deeply, deeply held in this House, in the State House. Reaching not just to someone's speech, but to their very sense of self, their very core of identity and consciousness, I'm aware, I'll wrap up quickly, is clearly a First Amendment violation and clearly government overreach. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Crystal Ivy. No? Let's go with Nissa Nagel.
Good morning, Chairman Guthrie, members of the committee. Much of what I wanted to say has already been said very articulately, so I just want to make one point. I was at the House hearing for this bill, and I heard the sponsor answer a question of, I believe it was Representative Gannon. They said, the sponsor said that they conferred with the Alliance Defending Freedom and Heritage Foundation on these definitions rather than the medical and scientific community. And I think that speaks for itself. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Grace Howitt. Welcome.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Grace Howitt, and I serve as a policy assistant for Idaho Family Policy Center. We support House Bill 421, and we thank the sponsors for bringing this bill forward. Unfortunately, progressives in our society are set on deconstructing the distinctions between males and females, and they're waging a war on the long-standing legal meanings of these terms. This is a problem because without clear definitions of male and female, sex-based protections for women-only sports and women-only domestic violence shelters become meaningless. Maintaining separate bathrooms, locker rooms, and changing areas for biological males and biological females becomes impossible. And implementing reasonable sex-based workplace distinctions, for instance, policies that require male and female employees to wear sex-appropriate work uniforms, becomes legally problematic. Thankfully, House Bill 421 creates policy-neutral and rock-solid statutory definitions for sex, gender, mother, father, and other sex-based terms that would be applied consistently throughout state code. Don't let the radical left erase important sex distinctions in our
Don't-
state law.
Yeah, don't refer to somebody as radical, please.
Okay, noted. Please vote to send House Bill 421 to the floor with a do pass recommendation.
Thank you. Let's go with Mary Ruck. Welcome.
Good morning. My name's Mary Ruck, and good morning, Chair and Committee. I'm speaking for myself. I'm a little disappointed to be back. These kinds of bills are wearing, and I appreciate what's been said already. I just want to call down what Representative Young said the other day in a hearing. And she said, and she was angry, how dare you? She said, how dare you get in between me and my kids? It was some other bill. And I thought, that is exactly how I feel. It seems unnecessary, and I'm afraid I agree with Senator Wintrow. I just don't understand what the point of this bill is. So I wish that could be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see if we can go to Karen Hansen virtually. Good morning.
Can you hear me?
Speak up just a little bit, or just
Can you hear me
introduce
now?
yourself. You're pretty weak.
Oh, heavens. Let's see. There we go. Can you hear me now?
That's better.
Okay, I'll speak loud. I'm Karen Hansen from Viola, Idaho. Please vote against House Bill 421. This bill is a disservice to everybody in the state, whether they are transgender or not. I am against any bills that broadly change Idaho law for the purpose of micromanaging people's personal lives and their right to live their lives in a way that brings them peace of mind. This bill violates the right to privacy by forcing people into very awkward and unhelpful situations for no good reason. It is far better and less confusing for a person that looks and acts like a woman to use the women's restrooms regardless of XX or XY chromosomes. Likewise, as a woman, I would much prefer that a person who looks like a man and acts like a man use the men's restroom. Who cares about chromosomes? For that matter, a guy with XY chromosomes could claim he is transgender and walk right into the ladies' room and make himself right at home. No, thank you. In these public situations and many others, nobody knows the other person's specific genetic makeup, so it does not matter. This bill is unhelpful government overreach into the private lives of citizens and accomplishes no public good. This bill will create a lot of unexpected difficulties and embarrassment for everyone. This bill will create even more gender confusion than we already have. Please don't intrude in our private lives in this way. Vote against House Bill 421. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us this morning. Let's go with Joanna Schaefer. Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Joanna Schaefer. I am here as a resident of Idaho, a citizen of the United States of America, and an American soldier. I've been a member of the U.S. Army Reserves for the last 4.5 years, and I have lived and carried this card that holds the Soldier's Creed and Army values on it with me ever since I enlisted. I'm only going to share a portion of the Soldier's Creed with you that I think is paramount here. It's that I am an American soldier. I am a warrior and a member of a team. I serve the people of the United States and live the Army values. I am a guardian of freedom and the American way of life. I don't get to choose who's on my team. Just like all the representatives in any elected body does not get to choose who they represent. I swore an oath to protect my fellow Americans, as you have sworn an oath in your office to serve our fellow Americans. I am against House Bill 421 because it becomes too legalistic. I would disagree with the senator that spoke this morning that subjectivity does exist objectively, and is also essential to the human experience. There is some credit to this bill only in that if we are to push definitions for to enable the legislative process, I would say that this bill is just incomplete. It is inaccurate scientifically, and I also believe it goes against a religious moral code as evidenced by Jesus Christ, and the two greatest commandments that he gave to us is to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, mind, and soul, and also to love our neighbor as ourselves. And with that, I urge you to vote against this House bill, or to strongly reconsider that it needs further, more comprehensive and inclusive definitions. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. We'll try to go to Jessica Rowland virtually.
Camera doesn't seem to be working.
Good
but
morning.
I am here. Good morning.
Can you speak up a little bit? We don't have video, but we can hear you.
Okay. Let me turn my volume up. Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, just go ahead and introduce yourself. And
Okay, good morning. I am Jessica Rowland. I am a board certified family medicine physician practicing in Southeast Idaho. I'm here to testify against HB 421. I have been studying human biology for the past 14 years. There is absolutely no such thing as a binary in sex or gender. This idea that variants in sexual development are not exceptions to the binary nature of sex is a gross misunderstanding of biological and sociological developments in human nature. This bill does not take into account humans who are intersex. How is this bill to account for individuals who present with ambiguous genitalia at birth, like my patient with congenital adrenal hyperplasia? 1 in 20,000 people are born with ovotestes, a form of true hermaphrodism, in which their gonads produce both ovarian and testicular tissue, a condition commonly seen in cows for those of you who are in the ranching industry. What does this mean for the patients with androgen insensitivity syndrome who have XY chromosomes and female external genitalia but did not develop a uterus? Are you aware of 5-alpha reductase insufficiency, in which people are born with genitalia that looks female but then develops male at puberty? This is seen very commonly in Cyprus and the Dominican Republic. Gender is a separate topic. I can tell you that every major organization in medicine separates gender from sex in definitions. Gender is personal and is determined by roles one plays in society. It is an incredible measure of hubris to assume that every culture agrees with your interpretation of gender as a binary associated with sex organs. There are countless examples of gender diversity in various cultures throughout humanity, including Mahu in Hawaiian, Two-Spirit in Native American, Hijra in Hindu, Waria in South Asia, Fa'afaini in Pacific Islands, etc. By combining gender and sex and limiting it to a binary, you are erasing American and world culture. HB 421 contradicts the full body of law relating to sex and gender, resulting in unconstitutional vagueness of Idaho civil and criminal law. HB 421 fails to accurately predict fiscal impacts of constitutional defense litigation costs and the incalculable administrative costs associated with their vague and confusing intent. HB 421 reflects unawareness, ignorance, or disregard of medical and scientific understanding of the natural variation of human sex and gender. It leads to sex and gender policing and opens the door to sex verification, infringing on the rights and privacy of all Idahoans. I implore you to vote against HB 421. It will do nothing but harm the people of Idaho. Thank you.
Dr. Rowland, we have a question from Senator Wintrow.
Thank you, Dr. Rowland. As a physician, help us define better the word sex, gender, gender identity, gender expression. So what did you learn in med school?
Dr. Rowland?
So sex is an assignment that is made at birth. It's usually male or female, typically based on external genital anatomy. Sometimes it is based on internal gonads, chromosomes, and hormone levels. Again, sex is not a binary. Gender is specifically related to constructed roles that are social and behavior and expressions and identities. The American Association of Pediatrics defines gender identity as a deep internal sense of being, whether that be female, male, or a combination of both, somewhere in between, neither, and it is multifaceted. Gender expression is the external way that a person expresses their gender. And these things, it's really important that these are separated and understood distinctly from each other because they are so different from each other, and they all together work together to make a person, but they are very distinct from each other.
One more question, Mr.
One more,
Chair.
Senator Wintrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Dr. Rowland, you talked about being intersex. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And maybe when somebody starts to identify, or we start to, there's a process there, but sometimes, what's an age that an intersex person typically starts to identify?
Dr.
Or
Rowland?
is identified?
Thank you. Intersex is actually a very interesting world. 1 to 2 people in 100 people in the U.S. are intersex, and it can be identified at any point in a person's life, from the point where they are born, if they have ambiguous external genitalia, to when they're going through puberty and they're not developing the way that somebody would expect to see, or even when they are trying to have children and they're not able to reproduce. A person can actually go their entire life being intersex and not ever know that. In Boise, we actually have a pediatric urologist I was speaking with last night about her patients. And she said that even when she's working with her patients that are determined to be intersex, it can take up to 6 months to even identify what it is that is intersex about them.
Thank you, Dr. Rowland, for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Jenna Damron. Welcome to committee.
Chairman Guthrie, members of the committee, I am here to testify today in opposition of this bill. I work for the ACLU of Idaho, and my colleague has already come and testified, but today I want to bring a different perspective than her. So for a minute, I'm actually going to take this off. I'm one of the 48,000 Idahoans who identify as queer, and I'm part of the queer community. Over the last 3 months, I have literally spoken to hundreds of people, my friends, my community, folks that have gotten in contact with me because they're worried about the impact that these bills will have. These are people that live all over the state. They live in Boise, Coeur d'Alene, Pocatello, and yes, even in Blackfoot, Idaho, where the sponsor of this bill was elected to represent them. I've spoken to trans people, non-binary adults, intersex people, and other people in my community who are terrified about the erosion of our rights due to legislation just like this and other bills passed this year. I want to really focus on the things that those people have to say to you. And so I collected some quotes from them about the impact that this legislation would have on them. In regards to House Bill 421, the terms cisgender, transgender, intersex, and non-binary, these are all terms that exist, yes, even in biology, and we should become familiar with them instead of pretending they don't exist and trying to legislate them out. Another quote, HB 421 would erase my biological identity because I'm intersex. Another quote, HB 421 would force me to live a lie. It permits the legislature to pretend people like me don't exist rather than admit that we are Idahoans and we are not going anywhere. Another quote, HB 421 would erase my identity and entire communities of real people. We are Idahoans, we are Americans, we deserve respect and recognition. Another quote, I want my child to grow up in a place where she can exist as a person free from discrimination. Idaho is our home, and we have had to continually consider whether or not we will have to move to keep our families safe. Another quote, queer and trans people's personal lives are no more unusual or wrong than non-queer people, just less normalized, As a Christian, I suggest that you do as Jesus said and honor the golden rule. Who are we to judge some Idahoans as worthy of equal dignity and others as not? Another quote.
Could you wrap up?
Yes, I have just one more quote, actually. This bill seeks to disregard decades of research proving both the social reality of trans people and the biological reality of intersex people. This bill would allow the state to rewrite the facts and erase the legal recognition of anyone who does not fall into a very narrow and biologically inaccurate category. With that, I ask you to please vote no on this legislation.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Dylan Goldati? I probably didn't get that. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairman Guthrie and members of the committee. My name is Dylan Goldade. I'm from District 16, and I'm representing myself. I am asking you to vote no, or if it makes you more comfortable, please put forward a motion to hold this bill indefinitely. As Jenna said, and as Jessica Rowland said, the terms cisgender, transgender, assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth, these are all terms accepted by the American Psychological Association. They're real terms, and trying to define them out of existence won't change that. I would also like to respond to the testimony of Idaho Family Policy Center. The notion that women's shelters would have no more meaning if these definitions aren't passed. What it would do is force trans assigned female at birth, so that's someone who was born and assigned female at birth but then transitioned, that would force them into women's shelters because their chromosomes are defined as the women's sex chromosomes, XX, right? So that would put a male-appearing person into women's shelters. So that's what I would say to that. Also, Idaho Family Policy Center has 3 billboards and 2 offices around town. They're the only ones that are in favor of this, just noting that. And finally, I hope the irony is not lost on you that this bill has failed to define what man and woman is, because that is folly. With that, I see the rest of my time.
Thank you for your testimony. That concludes those that have signed up. Senator Adams, would you like to close?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Maybe pull that mic down a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just touch on a couple of things that were brought up in testimony so we can get them out of the way. If you look at the language of the bill, and this deals specifically with the concern about intersex or sexual development disorders. Note the language, female means an individual who has had, will have, or for a developmental or genetic anomaly or historical accident would have the reproductive system that at some point produces, transports, and utilizes eggs for fertilization. I don't see how this is controversial. And you'll notice there's a subjective would have that captures the way disorders are understood in biology. Also, I wanted to clarify, according to PubMed, the percentage that fall under this category nationally is under 0.1%, 0.018%, not 2 out of 100. So, let's see. Another thing I want to touch on, this bill does not claim that all uses of the term sex and gender are synonymous. Okay, it doesn't. It merely picks out the cases for our laws, for our definitions, where gender is used to refer to the natural differences between males and females. Definitions are important. We do lose objectivity when we don't have hard definitions. Federal law does use from time plenty. It interchanges sex and gender in their definitions. However, our state code does not. They both mean the same thing. And we don't write federal policy, we write our policy. We know there are inherent differences between men and women. We know that. One thing I wanted to touch on, somebody mentioned feeling like they were being erased. But again, if you look at the definition of gender in the statute, we're only counting that and defining that when it's used to refer to males and females, which everyone falls under that category. So if you identify as something else, that is something completely different. That is your gender identity or your gender, whatever you identify as. This doesn't touch that. And that would be a policy to bring that language. This law is objective to biology, not to identity. Let's see. Again, Mr. Chairman, I see this as a pretty straightforward cleanup bill. All the concerns that I heard today, although I appreciate the concern that people have, and I know that this has a tendency to spool people up, this is in line with the intent of legislation we've already previously agreed on in this body and has been signed into law. This clarifies those definitions.
Senator Burnt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Adams, for being here this morning. Thank you for all the testimony that we've heard. You mentioned earlier in your testimony, Senator Adams, that words matter, and I couldn't agree with you more. That words absolutely matter, and it's there's a lot of litigation going on because of some bills that were passed. And I'm not saying whether those bills, I'm not here to litigate whether or not those bills are good or bad or indifferent. But what I'm wanting to know is if this bill is just going to be another bill or another law that's going to be held up in the courts because of legality issues. And so do you have a legal opinion from the AG or someone that would give me more confidence that this is just not going to be another bill that's going to end up in the court system?
Senator Adams, that's asking for a lot of latitude with your thoughts, but go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Burnt, if you find an AG's opinion lying around, you let me know. However, this clarifies the definition, which is why if you go back to the bill that's in front of you, it addresses 3 sections of code that are currently caught up in litigation and clarifies the definition so the courts have a better understanding of what we mean.
Senator Winthrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just one question, Senator, and it's just kind of basic, but as I'm walking around everyday life, how do I tell somebody's a man or a woman, or a male or female, excuse me, because we don't have that one defined? How do you know with certainty?
Senator Adams.
Mr. Chairman, I know it's not common to ask a question when you get asked a question, but I don't know how Senator Winthrop would be able to interpret. I think for the average Idahoan, it's pretty clear.
You good, Senator Winthrop?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Senator Adams. Maybe I should just ask you, how do you know? Like, I'm walking around, people look very different. Like, how do I ascertain somebody is male or female?
That's asking for a lot of latitude with your, you don't have to answer that if you don't want, Senator.
I don't think I'm going to answer that.
I don't see any other questions. Committee, Senate Bill or House Bill 421 is before us. Senator Taves.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we send House Bill 421 to the floor with a due pass recommendation.
Motion by Senator Taves, second by Senator Harris, that House Bill 421 be sent to the floor with a due pass recommendation. Discussion on the motion, Senator Taves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that this is being made to be something more controversial than I think it is, because our current code talks about chromosomes. This is, I think, a clarification from our existing definitions if you actually look at what's being changed. And I think it's a clarification that's necessary and helpful. It creates a bright line, makes the court system able to identify what these words mean better. I think it's helpful because it gives an objective way to interpret our law. So I encourage you to support this.
Other discussion on the motion? Senator Shea.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm again mindful of my position here as a substitute senator. I feel very confident that Senator Ruckty has confidence in my comments here today. And I know that my district, this is an issue that's important to them, and I feel that I need to speak up. What this committee might not know about me is that my background is in civil rights litigation. I worked for the Virginia Attorney General's office for a decade and specialized in civil rights defense for a GOP administration. And in my work there, I appreciated the fact that when they came to me for advice about whether something they wanted to do was unconstitutional, if I told them it was, and I couldn't really defend it in court, they would heed that advice. And they were not interested in advancing doomed policy at the expense of Virginia taxpayers. And I appreciated that about them. Idaho is currently embroiled in litigation concerning gender-affirming care, youth sports, bathrooms. Idaho has already lost civil rights litigation concerning gender identification on birth certificates, and this bill still addresses that issue as an issue that Idaho has already lost. I'm very concerned about what this is going to mean for Idaho taxpayers. I don't agree that this litigation is harmless, meaningless semantics. It is clearly intended to dictate gender policy in Idaho. The birth certificate provision is just one example of that. I'd also point out that a little more than 50 years ago, Idaho code treated men and women very differently. It was Reed versus Reed in 1971, an Idaho case that went to the Supreme Court, brought by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of my own personal heroes. And that case established that you can't do that. You can't treat men and women differently under the code. And over the course of the next 15 years, in case after case, in the Supreme Court as well as in the Idaho Supreme Court, we have decision after decision saying you must treat men and women differently, to the point where now our code definition says when male and female is used in the code, you have to use those terms interchangeably. And I know that Senator Wintrow has tried to clean up our gender definitions in the code to comply with that law unsuccessfully. Yesterday, the Senate passed a very powerful resolution condemning racism, and I am honored and privileged that I got to be a part of that discussion. Today, we are discussing whether we should codify another type of discrimination, and I think you're buying Idaho a whole lot of trouble if you advance this bill. I'll be voting no.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I also agree that this is not just a cleanup housekeeping bill, because I have the benefit of perspective and experience and seeing these bills work their way through this legislature. This is more than incrementalism, but I think as we look over the past several years, we know exactly where this is headed. And we can acknowledge that men and women are different, but we can also acknowledge, as Senator Shea said, that we also have case law that says we do not want men and women to be treated differently under the law. And that's what we're delving into here. I also am really sitting here heavy on my heart with the statements that have been made by many people in this committee and many times over this legislature that our Constitution is to protect the minority. And when we look at a vulnerable, marginalized, already a small number of individuals who would be harmed. I think that should matter to us. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Wintrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if I can say it any better than that's what already been said, but I want to emphasize a couple things. I really appreciate everybody that came to testify, and I thank you for sharing and being vulnerable. I appreciate the physicians to provide the accurate definitions and understanding of medicine and physiology, and that the entire range of the human experience cannot be crammed into two little identifying categories, and that these definitions are socially constructed. We are choosing how we want to define people. And I think in the United States of America, and case law would support it, that we have the personal freedom and right to privacy to be who we want to be and to live the life we choose and to be treated with dignity and respect like any other American. And that to do this kind of a bill, which is not just a cleanup bill, is a clear institutionalization of sexist beliefs. And I don't use that as a pejorative. I think that the struggle I see, the gift of age is that you see trends. I was a kid in the 1970s, and I've watched the progress of our country, and especially when it comes to gender and gender roles, and that women and men, there's nothing more like me on the planet than a man, right? But we continue to try to separate each other as if we're so different. And that's what creates inequities, hierarchies, and eventually violence. Gloria Steinem once said the most important thing she could do is humanize gender roles. And what she meant by that is that we're human beings above all, and that every person should have the right and the ability to express themselves how they choose. We shouldn't have to, boys don't cry, girls, or homemakers and these kind of things, that anyone could live the life they want and not be confined by cultural expectations. And this bill is doing that. It's saying there's only two, when that's really just not true. It's just not true. And so, obviously I'm going to vote against the bill, but mostly because it's just not true. It's not fact. And because it's not fact, it's institutionalizing a majority viewpoint potentially that will obviously oppress a minority. So with that, I thank you all for coming, and, I hope we vote this down.
Senator Taves.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to stand by my previous remarks that this is being made into something it's not. I'm going to read what we're changing, okay? So I'm actually going to refer to the bill on page 3, line 21. Our current definition of sex reads, and I'm believing that a lot of the people that are against this bill would disagree with the current definition, which is why I say this is likely a clarifying bill and is likely creating a bright line. So sex, it says, our current law says, means the immutable biological and physiological characteristics, specifically the chromosomes and internal and external reproductive anatomy, genetically determined at conception and generally recognizable at birth, that define an individual as male or female. So we're already, in our current code, we're already saying there's two, male or female, and we're already referring to chromosomes. And what I see this bill doing is just making it even more clear. But I'm guessing that the same people that are upset about this bill would be upset about our current definition. So from my point of view, this is just creating a clarity for the court system.
Don't see any other discussions, and I'm going to ask Madam Secretary to call the roll on House Bill 421, and the motion is to send to the floor with a do pass recommendation.
Senator Byrne? No. Senator Winder? Aye. Senator Anthem?
Aye.
Senator Harris.
Aye.
Senator Lee.
No.
Senator Taves.
Aye.
Senator Wintrow. Senator Ruckty.
Shay.
Shay, sorry. Chairman Guthrie.
Aye. Motion carries 5-4. Thank you.